Hey everyone, it's Irene and
Seth, hello.
And we are here to talk about the nervous system, trauma, dysregulation, and as we like to say, the kiddos, the children, the kids, the infants, the babies, the teenagers,
the grown-up kids.
Yeah. And we've never done a side-by-side video like this.
No.
We'll see if we manage.
Yeah.
But I'm going to do a quick intro just about what we're talking about, and then we'll dive into some things. We never got any live questions. So if you have questions about kids, dysregulation, healing trauma in relationship to the work we do, Smartbody SmartMind. I mean, that's not the only work we do, but that's what we're doing right now. So as a quick reminder, my online program called Smartbody SmartMind is open for registration right now until the 19th, which is next Tuesday. So it's possible if you're watching this recording like in 2 years, we're not in that moment. But for those getting this now live between the 12th and the 19th of September, this is the time that we open up registration to new members to Smartbody SmartMind. I did a call yesterday on the 12th, longer form call describing what SBSM is, its origin story, why I created it, what's in it, what you get, the features, the support, some stories from our alumni and how they have shifted and transformed so much. So if you haven't watched that, please go back and watch that after this. I'm not going to repeat myself because I want to really focus on kids, dysregulation, trauma, the nervous system. If you are tuning in live, looks like we have about 33 people here. Let us know where you are. Are you interested in doing Smartbody SmartMind? Are you a parent? Are you a soon-to-be parent? Are you a teacher? Are you a grandparent, aunt, uncle, cousin? Do you work with kids? Or are you an adult who obviously once was a kid and you are trying to understand your past, your history, your trauma, and how it fits into this nervous system work? Because it definitely does. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to move our screen over here so that we're not staring at ourselves. And there we go. So we can see the chat.
Great.
Okay. Hey, Anna. Yes, the YouTube plaque is in the background. Thank you for noticing that. Anna is one of our SBSM members and one of our more senior Scientuitive trainees.
Yeah.
So, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure.
Because there might be people who don't know who you are.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm Seth, and I met Irene about, I think we realized about 13 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I was living basically in the middle of the woods at the time at a hot springs resort, and I had been living in the woods in one form or another for about 15 years. That was all part of my lifestyle choice that was largely about managing my trauma. And it wasn't really until I met Irene and got into this work, because she had just finished the somatic experiencing training, that I really got into understanding my trauma and how what I had experienced as a kid, which we could get into more later, affected me in the ways it was still playing out. And I had done all sorts of stuff. I mean, I had been immersed in the new age hippie community for over a decade, doing all the things: meditation, breath work, energy work, emotional movement, processing, all that stuff. And it was all helpful to a degree, but it hadn't really gotten deep into the system because I didn't understand the nervous system piece, which is the most crucial to have as a foundational understanding.
Yeah.
Right? When you're working with trauma, there's all sorts of things we may do that involve expression or sound or movement or breath, but we have to understand the nervous system physiology for that stuff to be effective. So that's what landed for me as I got to know you and I got into the work, and why I became so passionate about it.
Yeah.
And why I trained and became a practitioner.
Yeah. Yeah. So for those of you that don't know, we're married.
Yeah. By the way,
he's just not stopping in for this call. So we're married. Obviously, we're colleagues. Seth is trained in somatic experiencing, also the work of Kathy Kane,
Yep.
Which is somatic practice and working with touch, early trauma, developmental trauma. Here's a question for you. If you had just gone into the trauma work first,
right,
and not gone into the light worker world, the shamanistic world, the meditation world, the more spiritual, whatever you want to call it, world, do you think that you would have needed all those things to the degree that you needed in your 20s?
No, of course not.
Yeah.
No, of course not. I mean, everyone's got their own path, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say it was wrong to go into those things first, because it's just what happened. It was in the flow for me at that time. But yeah, none of it really did much.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time essentially just sort of wasting time and spiraling around in my own trauma, thinking I was processing it, but not actually changing it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think if I had discovered that nervous system work first, it would have made me much more informed. I wouldn't have spent so much time with practices that weren't that helpful. Or some of the practices I used would have been more helpful because I would have had that understanding of the principles we teach, like titration, the need to go slow, learning to understand the language of your nervous system, like how it speaks to you, how those messages can be very quiet and often get buried by these bigger, high energy practices. So yeah, I think it would have been very good to learn that first, but yeah. So that's why we have an opportunity to help people do that now, right? Yeah.
Okay, so there's questions coming in. We'll obviously get to those. And how do you want to start this story around kids and dysregulation and trauma? You and I, so just to give you an idea, Seth and I have totally different stories about our upbringing, our trauma. I can safely say, thanks, Mom and Dad, that they did nothing that was around toxic shame. I've never been yelled. I've never been hit. I'm blessed with that. However, my trauma is different, and I'm not going to go into my whole story today because we did another story.
There's a whole thing on it. There's a whole interview on
There's
that.
almost a 2-hour interview, and we can pop this up on the chat. Don't watch it now. Stay here with us now. But we'll put that also in the show more. And Bonnie, who's here finding those links, can pop that in. But as a short story of that, my trauma was more in utero. It was chemical. I was exposed to way too many chemicals throughout my life. And then I had a ton of accidents, anesthesias, surgeries. I've had up to 8 general anesthesias, some more serious than others. So my freeze and my dysregulation wasn't because I had crappy parents. It was from other things. But I say that because some people will say, I actually wasn't yelled at. I wasn't spanked. Mom and Dad actually really cared for me. And that's great. And we can also have things that screw us up and put us into dysregulation that have nothing to do with what parents do to us or lack of. But today we're going to talk about how dysregulation in adults and parents can bleed over to the kids. And then there's some cases where it isn't the parent. So I want to just really put that in there. Like I said, if there's surgeries at birth, if there's near-death experiences, it might have nothing to do with the faulty lack of attunement, improper attachment, all that kind of stuff. So take it away. Share your story.
Sure. I mean, because mine is much more of a classic sort of story of how the trauma gets passed down intergenerationally through the epigenetics, but also through the behavioral reinforcement. And when we're talking about trauma, parents and kids, it's both of those things. So for me, I was born preemie 6 weeks early and thrown into an incubator for a while. And that was a profound rupture, very foundational piece of isolation and separation that's very, quite common, and then my parents split up when I was 2, and I ping-ponged back and forth between their houses for my entire childhood and adolescence. And they were very different households. So like my dad's house He was very anxious, and that manifested as rage, and he was very controlling. And so life at his house was like constantly walking on eggshells. When am I going to get screamed at? When am I going to get hit? It was very much about navigating a minefield, constantly being on edge, hyper vigilant. And then I would go to my mom's house, and it was the opposite. It was like boom, collapse into sort of this, emotional safety, which was really important. Like I could go to my mom's house and rage, and like sort of process to some degree all the built up sympathetic activation that had been simmering at my dad's. But then there would be a collapse, and my mom, bless her, was caring and attuned to the best of her ability, but was herself very traumatized, very much living in freeze. And she's a really good example of someone who was caring, loving, made room for emotional space, right? All these things we're supposed to do. Yet she herself was so traumatized, collapsed in freeze, that I took that as a model. So I'd be like, okay, simmering, tense, and then blah, collapse into freeze and just sort of lethargy. And so it was this real toxic soup of ping-ponging back and forth between different states of activation. And that then played out in many ways in my adult life, such that I had to isolate myself in the woods, which was like that safe, cozy mom's house, essentially, right? Limiting stimuli, etc. I would go to the city. About after an hour or so, I would start being like, okay, here comes the anxiety, and I'd have to get out of there, or just like stay medicated through cannabis. So it was the same thing, like go into the world and until the tension becomes unbearable, and then retreat to my home in the woods and collapse, right? So it's something that I wasn't able to get underneath until I discovered this work and actually moved into the world, into the city, and had to meet all of those challenges from a place of not just coping, but actually learning to really function, learning to really thrive from a regulated place. So it's a long story, and it is so. I see some comments like I feel very related. Someone said that's really relatable to me, and I think there's probably lots of people who had sort of different dysregulation models from their parents. Right.
And I think that's where what's important to understand, especially if you're new here, because again, let us know if you're brand new, because that'll tailor how we talk, because we don't want to get too technical, right? But it's so important to understand that us humans, we are mammals. And just like, bears in the woods and deer and all the other furry creatures are house pets. When you think about a litter of kittens or puppies, granted the mother as well. Most of them are, having been raised by 2 veterinarians. I can tell you right now that it's very rare that a mom in the wild neglects and has postpartum depression. Something has to be wrong with her. She has to be sick. She has to be in some ways damaged, usually through injury, to not care for her young little cubs, etc. And so that nurture, that safety, sleeping with her babies, like you would never have a mother bear put her cubs in a crib.
That's not going to happen.
If a cub is hungry, she's going to feed them, but she's also going to teach them right from wrong. She's going to teach them how to fish and how to forage and how to do all the things that they need to do. And so humans need that same kind of, we could say, safety, nurture, attunement, connection, teaching right from wrong. And because of human culture and religion, I see someone mentioned religion a second ago, and society and parenting books and the medicalization of birth. I've done some talks about that. And I'm blunt in how I talk, we have absolutely messed up that innate organic intelligence of how a human is supposed to be with little babies. And there is a right way to raise a little baby. Now, once the child starts to show their creative spark and their soul spark, and okay, this kiddo is much better at these things, and this kiddo is much better at this thing.
Yeah.
Then you nurture that individuality. But the first few years is all about what you would do with a little cub in the wild.
Yeah.
And there's this debate as to whether or not, oh, I'm an attachment parent or I'm a this parent. And it's like, no. And this can sometimes ruffle some feathers.
So yeah.
Because what will happen, and this is for parents here who have already raised their kids and are like, oh my goodness, I didn't know that we were not supposed to do these things, like let our babies,
Which is me as well, by the way. I'm also a parent who passed on stuff.
So we don't know, like we didn't know. My parents didn't know. Don't put your baby in a crib. Don't let them cry themselves to sleep. Don't put them on their tummies before they're not ready. Don't force them to eat all their dinner if they're not wanting it. Let's not be afraid when they're crawling and roaming around and playing.
Yeah.
So I am not a biological parent, and that can sometimes confuse people. But the reason why I have that connection to how to care for little ones naturally is because I was cared for in the way that was supposed to happen. Yes, there were other things that occurred, but that imprint was really strong in me.
Yeah.
And then I was raised around animals, seeing this natural connection.
Yeah.
But then you had a totally different situation with how you were with your son. So do you want to talk about like the shaming piece?
Sure.
Okay.
And this is a classic dynamic when kids grow up to be parents and we were traumatized as kids. There's very often a swing to sort of do the polar opposite of the things that you were subjected to. So for me, as I came into my parenthood, the things that were most prominent in my awareness and my wounding at the time was all the controlling and rage and rigidness of my dad, and just the rules and the overly rigid structure. And so I went the opposite way of not having nearly enough of that, of just basically being my son's best friend and playing with him and spending lots of time and getting into our imagination together and doing all sorts of great positive things. But I didn't do the like, now you have to clean this up, now you have to make your bed, now it's time to do this. Like, I was not good with the structure piece, the boundaries piece. And that's just a classic thing that can happen where we swing and we overcorrect. And that's also a dysregulated response. It wasn't until my son lived with us together when he was in high school that I really had to. It was tough because Irene, of course, would see these things that were happening, and it was really tough for me to hear. Like, for me to feel like I had to lay down a boundary or a rule with my son literally felt like death. Like, it felt like I would die if I did that. That's how strong those imprints can be. And it's another thing that's really important to understand about kids. When you're a parent, your kids will reflect to you your unhealed spaces very powerfully. And so that's part of what was happening there. There was an opportunity there for me to heal, right, by confronting that scary thing, but I didn't know how to do it, unfortunately, until he was grown. Now I do, right? But it's a little too late. And so I saw a comment of someone like, I feel terrible. Like, yes, I'm one of those people who passed on my trauma to my kids. It's never too late, is what I'm here to say. Yeah, I was the same thing. I loved him. I didn't know these things. And I had these wounds in myself that made doing things correctly in some ways very scary. But as I got healed and regulated, even though he's now an adult, I see it pinging through his system. I see it impacting the family system. I see it impacting my dad as well. My dad, as I've gotten more regulated, my dad has softened incredibly, become more emotionally available. It's this kind of magical thing that happens. I think it has something to do with how we're interconnected at this nervous system, genetic level. When one person in the family system does the work to become regulated, it ripples out and affects the entire family system, even if they're not around you. Now, I've been fortunate enough to spend quite a bit of time with my son as an adult in recent years, and I think that's helped even more. Him being around me in this regulated place has really had a positive impact, even though he's an adult now. So it's never too late.
And I think, as a general kind of, I don't want to call it a rule, but suggestion is, if you are someone who has little people, like under the age of 10, or you haven't yet had your children, this is the time to learn about your nervous system, learn about what it is, get connected to your system, get attuned to your system, because when you are attuned to you, and you can sense your internal organs, this isn't just about, oh yeah, I feel emotions. It's like really visceral knowing of your gut and your heart and your muscles and your breath and your all the things that we do teach in SBSM. What happens is, not only are you listening to yourself better, you can listen to your little person better. And that's all they need. And it seems oversimplistic, but every single thing that a baby needs, they tell you through their energy. They tell you through their different cries. And when we have that on board, it's going to sound strange, but it is ridiculously simple to be with kids. And Seth has seen me with kids. And it's like they just chill.
Oh, yeah.
And there's stories where I've like tamed tantrums in like the Rome Colosseum. We did a video. I did a video on that because this kid was being abused and hit by its parents. And I'm like, I can't handle this anymore. So I like did something about it. But so often there's this thought, like, it's so hard. It's like, yes, you're going to be tired, especially with an infant, because you have to go by their schedule. You have to go by their schedule. Eventually, a baby will sync up with the circadian rhythm of the sun. But when you're that young, yes, you've got to wake up in the middle of the night to feed. It's not going to be this perfect system because they're so new. So there is something powerful about getting this on board for yourself, because it's innate in us to raise little people. We wouldn't be here as humans if it wasn't innate. But what's starting to occur now is kids are being born with so much dysregulation. Now, of course, there's the trauma. There's also all the toxins in the world, all the pharmaceuticals we impose upon them, the medicalization of birth, not having them connect and attach with mom right away, cutting the umbilical cord way too soon, all these sorts of things that hinder that natural connection. And there's so much that we can do that precedes that. And someone wrote a question, can you give some info and examples on how becoming regulated can change people around you? You just alluded to that. But essentially, we are energy beings, biology, electricity, we emit a field. And so if you've ever been around someone who's just chill and calm, right? Like if you've ever had a really good nurse or doctor who has a lovely bedside manner, it calms you. The flip side, you have someone who's frantic and just like this, and they're touching you, it makes you anxious and scared. Think about a mom or a father or a caregiver who's anxious and scared when they're touching their baby, even though they love their baby, but they're like this and they don't know how to feel. That's going to transmit nervous energy, survival stress to the little one
directly.
So our thoughts can be, I love you, but if your body is not representing that in an energetic field-based way, it's not going to work.
Well, this brings up a really important point, because lots of times people will say, oh, love is all you need, right, to raise healthy kids. And it's really not true.
No.
You need love, absolutely, but it's not all you need. If you can love them to death, but if you're dysregulated and your system is vibrating with those various activation patterns and frequencies, it's going to be broadcasting, love or not, right? So, and to answer that question in like a very concrete, specific example, like Irene said, having a baby is not easy, especially when you're doing all the right things like breastfeeding, being on their schedule, which is necessary. Thankfully, when my first wife and I had our son, we were in a situation where that was possible because we weren't really working. We were just being hippies in Hawaii, not much responsibility. And that's how it was. Like for the first few years of his life, it was very much like that. So it built that real solid foundation. But say, for example, we're more like a normal person and we're in the world and have work responsibilities and we're tired. Even if, we're able to be a full-time parent, say we didn't get met appropriately as a kid. Maybe we were sleep trained. Maybe we didn't have the proper attunement. Well, there's going to be these little pings of extra resentment and anger that can come through the system in mom every time baby wants to nurse at night because she didn't get that as a kid, right? And that can be unconscious. So there can be these very concrete ways in which our annoyances and activations and tensions that we haven't resolved pass on in the moment in all these ways. And then there's just sort of, the general field that we're holding. On contrast, when we do the work first or at the right time, like while we have kids, we can improve those things along the way, and we can have more access to these regulated responses.
And what I hear a lot of the time from students who have gone through SBSM who are parents is they will really trust this and they'll work on themselves, and then they will report back to us, I cannot believe how much easier it is now to be with my kids, to parent them. And I say, it's supposed to be that way. And the power struggles and the dynamics, we have so many examples that we can give, but I think the next question on that, do you want to read that out? Because I think this is a good one.
How do you handle a situation like when, for example, you're going on vacation with young kids and they don't want to go, or something similar, when it's not practical to let them decide everything?
Don't go on vacation. So I say that in humor, but this comes back actually to the story in Rome.
Sure.
So I'll tell it. I'll tell it quickly. So we were in Rome visiting the Colosseum in Palatine Hill, which is huge. It's a whole day affair. And we started with this tour guide, and we were with a bunch of people. And one of the bunches of people was a family of about 6. Little 5-year-old, mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, and I think an auntie. And at the beginning of this tour, the little kid was like running away and wanting to just run. Surprise, surprise, he's a 5-year-old. And grandpa grabbed him and hit him, like bad boy. And then what did the kid do? He hit him back, and then he got hit again, and then the cries ensued. He then probably went into a freeze response because that's what he did. And I also think they had a tablet to give him to look at, like a device. And then it just kept happening over and over again. And I kind of sat back and I was like, my God, if I was 5 years old, I wouldn't want to be touring the Colosseum in Palatine Hill, listening to the history of the Roman Empire and Caesar and all this stuff, and so it got to a point where towards the end of the day, you could tell everyone in this tour group was just had it with this poor little kid. And we were sitting at the bottom of the Colosseum waiting to go in, and there were all these rocks. And the kids started taking the rocks and throwing them at the parents. And I saw the mom about to explode and come over, and I was like, I can't handle this. So I sat on the ground, got on the ground. He instantly saw me, this kid.
Boom.
What?
Someone's coming to my level.
Someone's, and I started picking them up, and I picked them up and I showed them to him, and his eyes got so big. Engagement, right? Interest, play. And we were close enough that like he could come over to me, and he wasn't leaving his family system. I'm like, you want to play with the rocks? He's like, yes. And so we started building this tower of rocks, and he had this big smile on his face. He was super immersed. He was playing, simple. And I'm like, what do you want to do with that? And he took his little hand and he just smashed the shit out of this pound of rock, this pile of rocks. And he had so much agency, and he was so happy, and he was so proud of himself, and he calmed right down. And the mother came over and got him because we had to start the tour. And she's like, wow, you must be a teacher. You're so good with kids. And I was like, yeah, something like that. And I'm kind of rolling my eyes. I'm like, okay, don't judge Irene. But the thing is, that kid, he's 5. Imagine taking a newborn puppy on a tour like this. It will not like it. And so I think we have to, yes, you might want to go on that nice fancy vacation, but make sure there are breaks in the day to play with the kids. Or have them go to a thing where they're with other kids and they're being taken care of by a caregiver. And then the adults go off and do their adult things, and then you come back and you're with them. And I think it's so important to understand that we can't force kids to do stuff that they're not yet ready for. It's just like sit up straight, eat properly with a fork and knife. It's like that little person doesn't have the dexterity to do that.
Yeah.
They want to use their hands.
Yeah.
They want to get dirty. They want to be aggressive and scream when they're feeling activated.
Yeah.
And then we tell them to be quiet. It happened at dinner the other night. We were out for dinner, busy restaurant, and there was a family with a couple kids, and the little 4-year-old maybe.
Yeah, probably 4. He
started running around, and it was fine. He wasn't hurting anybody. And you could hear the joy because he finally got up from sitting. And I was like, I'm free. And then, of course, Dad's like, stop that, picks him up. And of course, he starts wailing and crying. And it's like, okay. Yeah. So
we got to be creative. It's not like you have to be kind of willing to not maybe follow society's mold to the letter if you want to do this properly, because it means playing with your kids in such situations and not being the proper adult in some situations necessarily. And another piece about this question is when they say when it's not practical to let them decide everything. I think maybe you're pinging off of what Irene said about following the kids' schedule. And to be clear, that's
infancy.
Yeah. Once they around 2 or so, when they start developing their ego a bit and start learning to say no and start individuating a little bit, that's 2, 3. When you start bringing in like, no, you can't do that right now. And like you start teaching about boundaries and things that are right and wrong or dangerous and safe. So it's not about always letting them decide everything. That's a very specific time frame where you really have to like match them and what they need. That's infancy. So just to be clear. But going on vacation, gotta make room for the possibility that it may not look like you want it to look. Yeah. And there will have to be some accommodation for the physiological reality of that young person, because they're not going to be able to necessarily do the things you want to do in the way you want to do them, right?
I mean, I'm going to use a totally different example. I liken it to getting an injury. When you have an injury and you just, can I say?
Sure.
Yeah. Seth just sprained his ankle. He's fine. But I always say to folks, if you sprain an ankle, this is my background in exercise physiology, treat it like a spinal injury. I am someone who did not take care of an ankle injury when I was young, and I still suffer with a swollen ankle because of not taking care of it. So that acute phase of an injury, you need to baby it like a cut. You're not going to just throw your hands in dishwater and keep opening that cut. You have to be very careful. You have to keep it dry. Ankle injury, you have to do all the things. At the beginning, just like with the baby, you have to be very, very attuned to them and their schedule. But eventually, as that injury strengthens and heals, and then you can start moving it a bit more. Then you can start testing it a bit more. And if you follow this sort of sequence, because there is a sequence to how humans must be raised. And I think this is the part that's just gets really tricky because we just don't want to agree upon this in our culture. So when you can do that at the beginning, very good. The other thing, don't be afraid when your children are old enough to walk and hold things, get them to help. I'm going to say this right now, get them to help with cleaning. Of course, they're not going to mop the whole floor, but like engage them with daily things. And that is also a way to engage with them so they learn the process of being a domesticated animal, right? Having home, having to cook, having to clean, because these are the things that I have seen a lot of young adults struggle with because that wasn't brought in earlier on. Whereas if you're in different countries, second world countries, which is, for instance, where my mother grew up, kids are doing things as soon as they're able, right? They're still playing. They're totally attuned to his babies. They're on the mom's back. They're sleeping with mom in a bed with like 10 other family members. This is in the Philippines. But as soon as they're able to do stuff, they're helping. And I think we underestimate the capacity for little people to take pride in helping around in the house. I know that sounds really remedial and simple, but it is a part of training us to be responsible, and we need to be responsible. So,
yep. That was just a follow-up question from, she was saying, specifically talking about what do you do if you're with a kid and in the moment there's something important that you have to go do. If you don't do it, it's going to be costly or it crashes major important plans. What do you do in that moment? I mean, essentially, you're talking about a power struggle. And here's the tough truth. If there's a power struggle, then stuff already has not been the best.
Yes.
That's just the way it is. You know, if we can't necessarily always avoid the fact that sometimes maybe a kid's going to get upset about something, like, sure. But like, if you look at tribal societies, if you read the Continuum concept,
great book.
Right, which I highly recommend reading, there aren't power struggles in those societies. It doesn't happen because when the attunement and regulation is there from the beginning, it's just a non-issue. We're in the flow together. We're attuned to each other. It's not a problem. So if there's a power struggle, there's already been an issue. That's just the way it is. In terms of how to navigate that, well, you do the best you can to attune to the kid, to be with them. If they're upset, you just make room for their upset. You don't necessarily try to squash it. Maybe you need to take them and go away somewhere else with them, so that you have some time to be together in a more sort of calm environment. You can let them have their emotions. That's sort of the best you can do. And this is the trouble, just the hard thing about parenting is that we can go off track so early that we end up with these questions like, well, what do I do about this situation? What do I do about this situation? And they're all valid questions, but they're also all indications that dysregulation's been in the picture from the get-go.
Yes.
And the fundamental answer is, well, you got to improve your own regulation.
Yeah. And the book that you mentioned, I'll say it again, just for the record, it's called The Continuum Concept. It's written by Jean Liedloff. She's passed, but if you Google the Continuum Concept and Jean Liedloff, and we can pop it up in the show more in the chat. It's such a great clip because she says things like, why do you have to tell a child good job? Why do you have to praise them? And we have seen through research that when you praise a child, it creates disaster, because then what happens when they don't do a good job? Right? Then what? Like, they suck? It's like, no, but that's actually how we've trained ourselves in the school system. If you don't get good grades, you're a loser, you're stupid, right? If you don't get a good report card, you're not going to get to go to Disneyland. So we have this power that's already a power struggle with personal capacity, and how we learn is then predicated on, oh, I'm going to get a reward, so I better do really well. And then it's just, it has created this in a way, a disaster in how we have power with ourselves and with those around us. The other thing that Jean talks about in her book, and I've seen this personally, being in places like the Philippines a lot, babies do not cry there. It's true.
Wow.
They might fuss a little bit, but it's over because they are attuned to. And they're soft. They're easy to move. They're not hard. They're not colicky. She says in this book, kids do not get colic in these tribal, more connected communities. This is not rocket science. But again, Western world puts the baby alone in a crib, in a room by themselves, wrapped up in clothes they don't need, not allowed to be free, to be on the ground, on the hard floor. If you haven't watched my Baby Live videos, be sure to watch those. Because when people see them, what happens is there's this alert of, oh my God, that little baby shouldn't be on a hardwood floor. They're going to get hurt. No, they are not. We are more resilient than we realize, but we pad, metaphorically and literally, our young, and then they don't have resilience. We don't take them out in the rain. It's not a nice day. I'm not going to go for a walk. What do kids do often when they're outside? They rip off their jackets. They want their bare skin against the air. They want to feel the rain, the wind. And then
instinctual wisdom.
It's us. It's like, it's not nice. We're not going outside. And how many of you as adults have that written in you. It's not a nice day, I'm going to stay inside all cozy.
Yeah.
Right. It's this weird upbringing, conditioning that we've had. And of course, there's other elements that happen when we don't go outside. We don't we don't get sunlight. We don't get natural air. We're not in the microbiome. And then that also impacts us. So that's a whole other tangent. Someone asks, have you both heard of hand-in-hand parenting? Yeah, I haven't studied it personally, but I know some of our colleagues within our moderation team whom are parents have used hand-in-hand parenting, and they really like it.
Yeah, it sounds like it's very much in line with what we're talking about needing to meet them at their level to play.
One topic that sometimes people ask is nonviolent communication.
Can
we talk about that?
Oh boy.
In response to healthy shame.
Oh wow.
Should we touch that?
We could, yeah. Well, growing up in the hippie, or not growing up, but living in the hippie world for over a decade, that was NVC was a big thing, nonviolent communication. I mean, I understand the premise. It's, of course, I mean, some of the foundational principles are important. Learning to listen, right? Making sure someone feels heard, right? That's important stuff. But what I've seen most nonviolent communication is that it just serves as this lid underneath which is still this sort of simmering rage, right? So it's like someone may be saying all the right things, but it's not matched to their physiological experience of what they're feeling.
Yeah.
And so it just becomes another form of management.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and it's shame is a big piece here because if we were toxically shamed as kids, as you were, it will be hard to understand that there's such a thing as healthy shame.
Yeah.
Let me give you an example. So toxic shame would be,
what I grew up with.
Yeah, like you're a piece of shit. You don't do anything well. What are some of the other things that
you're unacceptable.
You're unacceptable. That's unacceptable.
Yeah, you're gonna grow up working at a gas station. If you don't, all the various things. Yeah.
Nothing wrong with working at a gas station, but but still, that was your father's way of handling what he couldn't handle in himself.
Yeah.
When he saw you.
Yeah.
Versus my example of healthy shame is it's so clear because shame is somatic in our body and we need it. And some people might be like, oh, but none of it's good. That's not true. We need to have healthy shame to teach right from wrong.
At certain stages.
Yeah. And so I was quite young. I was in the kitchen. I was cutting something. I think it was a piece of bread. But for some reason, I had the knife turned to my face. And, I'm young. I don't know these things. It's the same with don't touch the hot stove. And my dad saw this, and with a very deep baritone voice, he said, Irene, look at what you're doing. You're going to hurt yourself. And it kind of startled me, which is what we need. Yeah, I paused. Yeah. I looked. I was like, oh yeah, you're right. So even to this day, if I am being reckless or rushing with cutting something in the kitchen, that feeling comes in and I pause, I wait, and I do it better.
Yeah.
That is healthy shame.
Yeah. And people, can I just clarify something? Because people may not understand how that is shame. Because they associate, and this is coming from me who experienced the toxic shame. If you've experienced toxic shame, which so many have, it's going to be very hard to understand this concept. Yes. It's not about feeling bad about yourself. And as soon as you say the word shame, if you've experienced toxic shame, you're going to think, oh, that means I feel bad about myself. Healthy shame is not that. It's a somatic imprint that says this is wrong or this is dangerous. Think about the posture of a dog that's done something wrong, where it's like collapsed, right? And the tail's between the legs. That is what we're talking about. It's a postural cue that goes into the system, and it stays there as a memory that tells the self, this thing is dangerous to do. So like Irene said, even as an adult, if she realizes she's about to cut something and she's rushing, nope, there comes some deep somatic cue, right? Yeah. It's not about feeling bad about herself, right? So healthy shame is like, don't do that. And then you're still there in connection with love. If the kid gets upset, you're there, I love you. I love you. You're good. Just this behavior, what you're doing was dangerous.
Yeah.
It's not about feeling bad about yourself. So.
And then the follow-up piece with that is, oh, did I just lose it? This ability to have a deeper voice.
Yeah.
Okay, this is really important, and I want to connect this to what one might learn in Smartbody SmartMind.
Yeah.
If we don't know how to exert our own healthy aggression in a healthy, positive way, and if we can't access this deeper viscera, organs of us, we're going to live up here. So it would be like, oh honey, don't hurt yourself.
Yeah, there's
right?
nothing.
I'm acting now, but it's like, no, don't do that, don't, right? But it's like, no, don't do that. There has to be this expression of, because what happens is that baritone voice creates a little bit of a fear response.
It comes from the gut.
From the gut.
It's embodied.
And you need that. And I see it all the time in the park with dogs. I'm going to go back to the animals. When a dog is doing something, misbehaving, and the owner is in this high-pitched voice, come here, Skippy, come on, don't do that, don't, right?
Nothing.
It's not going to happen. The dog has to feel that push of baritone, no, bad dog, right? And then they bark, they kind of jump, right? And then and then you see that shame. But then you're like, okay, it's okay. And then you scratch his ears, you smile. Oh, okay, everything's fine. Dogs are much more primitive. They recover faster.
Yeah.
But children at that toddler stage, they will recover, and they need that. And the one time I offered healthy shame to your son, because it had to happen, was the first night that he actually engaged and talked to me.
That's right. Yeah.
And it was mind-blowing to see happen, because
it was just theory in action, like this one moment of, just saying his name in a certain way because he was interrupting. And letting him know he was interrupting. And he stormed off. Cried, right? And then later that night was way more connected.
It was insane.
And it's because his physiology and psyche recognized that was something I needed.
Yeah. It was actually caring.
Yeah.
Giving him a boundary, because he had never had one, felt good to him somewhere. And that night at dinner, he used my name. He asked me questions. I was like,
where did that come from?
I was blown away. And so we offer that to you, because if you are a parent and you're afraid to teach right from wrong, to say, excuse me, you're interrupting me, which kids do, right? They'll do that. They'll never learn that discomfort of, okay, I have to wait.
Yeah. And again, I understand. Like I said, like saying no to your kid in these ways, laying down boundaries, to me felt like death. And I've heard from lots of other people who relate to that. And again, that's where this work comes in. You have to learn how to get into what's underneath that feeling like you're going to die if you do this, because that is what's pinging into your own childhood, into your own unresolved wounds. I see a great question here that, what would be one thing we can do to repair a moment when a disconnection happens between the child and parent? Example, child wants to retreat away after being told to stop ripping up the tissue box. So there's two things there.
Yeah.
Do you want to get this?
You start.
Well, one, if there is a moment where the kid needs to retreat after there's been some boundary, fine. Yeah. All you do is you just stay there and be available. Let them have their space and let them know you're there. Like, yep, fine. I'm right here when you want to come back. Love you, and you're just there, available. And eventually they'll come back seeking that repair and connection. Another thing, though, is why are you telling them to stop ripping up the tissue box in the first place?
Yeah.
Because this is, again, sometimes if our kids already have dysregulation, which is the norm for most of our society in the industrialized world, they're going to have aggression that needs to get out. And it may look like that. Yeah. And that actually might be okay to allow that if they really need to feel that this is healthy aggression work we talk about in the course. Sometimes you need to feel that experience of destroying something in order to get this activation to move through the system. Now, of course, there's also a boundary. We don't want to let kids go around destroying stuff all the time. And that's where education and setting comes in. And also learning how to be proactive in engaging your kids' aggression so that maybe it doesn't come to needing to destroy the tissue box. So this is, again, where play comes in.
Mm-hmm.
We need to, with our kids, learn to embody aggression in a healthy way through play, especially when they're young. It's so easy to do. I always use the example of like, let's be dinosaurs together. And
monsters.
Let's be monsters.
Dragons.
What kind of monster are you? Ooh, really? What sound do you make?
Rawr.
Oh, cool. And yeah, if you were to move around, what would you? I would stomp, right? And you get into it with them, and you do these movements, right? And you make the sounds, and again, you have to be comfortable playing with yourself, right? So much can happen to move that energy through before it gets to the destroying the tissue box stage. Right?
Yeah, and I want to also add, when you know this, you add in these things before it gets to the point where the kid needs to destroy it, like you just said. So I'm thinking about a friend of ours who has been learning this information, and she now has a 7-year-old, but over the last year or so, she knows that her little kid is having to sit in a desk for like the whole day at school, and recess is God only knows why.
Not nearly enough.
They're not doing it the same way they used to. They're not letting kids go outside, which we won't get into that. They don't have physical education the way we used to. I mean, I used to have PE every day.
Yeah.
Parts of it I hated, but at least we were out, trying to do basketball or volleyball or track or whatever. And so she knows that her little animal, her little cub, her little bundle of energy has been sitting still and probably rolling his eyes at teachers that are getting him to do things that he hates. She knows this. So what does she do before they come home? Let's go play some soccer.
Yeah.
Let's go to the field. Let's run. Let's hit the ball. She will do that before a meltdown happens, because I can guarantee you, if little one has been at school, and I'm not saying that the teachers are abusing them, but not allowing them to express enough.
Yeah.
If you take that little one home and there's even the tiniest bit of tension that you have as a parent between maybe you and your partner, or you're stressed because dinner isn't ready, or you don't know, whatever it might be.
Yeah, you had a bad day.
Whatever it is, that little person will feel that. And if there's the tiniest mis-attunement that you have with them, that's where the tantrum comes in.
Yeah.
That's where the blow up comes up. And so this ability to premeditate what they might need.
Yeah.
And again, I always go back to kittens and puppies. What do they do when they're little? They play, they're biting, they're being mischievous. We try to make our children mature too early. And they will, but they need that playtime. That movement with their body is what they need.
Yeah.
And
that all comes back to understanding this stuff, right? Like the only reason that parent knows to do that is because she did SBSM and she learned the physiology. And now she can recognize in her kid, oh, he's going to need this, obviously, because this is what his nervous system state is going to be like. And this connects back to something you said earlier, how there is a right way to raise kids, especially for the first few years.
Yeah.
As we get older, we do tend to individuate, but we also all have the same nervous system physiology that doesn't vary. It has the same needs from person to person, really, and that may express differently, and the way in which we meet those needs may be different based on the individual. But the fundamental wiring and the needs of the nervous system are universal.
Yeah.
So, and it's a mammalian system. Yeah. I mean, except for this
higher brain,
which more often than not gets us in trouble these days because it interferes with the instinctual knowing a lot of the time. It represses it, right? We all have the same physiology as that deer and that cat and that bear, right? So, Irene, do you want to get this one?
So the question is, any more advice on how to help kids be interested in helping out and learning responsibility if you don't give them any praise? I'm going to say that one more time. Any advice on how to help kids be interested in helping out and learning responsibility if you don't give them any praise? So it's simple, but it might feel odd. And that is, ask them, what was that like? What did you do today? What kind of effort did you put into doing that project or that craft? Or tell me about how you helped dad with whatever, right? Raking the leaves. Tell me, let me know how that felt. Let me know what you did.
Yeah.
Give me the play-by-play.
Yeah.
Right.
Ask them about their internal experience.
How did it feel? and the thing is when we just say good job, it completely bypasses their internal experience of how it felt for them. Yeah. And so small little tweak, but it makes a huge difference.
And it creates people who are self-motivated from the inside.
Yeah.
Because they learn, I want to do this thing because how it feels in me, rather than because I'll get praise, or if I don't do it, I'll get punished. It's a whole different paradigm that comes from that simple little switch about just asking someone about their experience.
And if I use myself as an example, like I was crap at school. I did not do well. C minuses, Ds. They thought I was retarded. You know, I was getting my ears checked, my eyes checked. What's wrong with her? I don't even know if it was just I was bored or whatever. I wasn't doing well in school. The thing that occurred back then in the 80s, thank God, is I wasn't labeled anything. And my parents didn't, it's not that they didn't care, they put no energy to it.
Yeah.
They saw that I was still a good kid. I knew how to engage with them, with the world. I played, I had friends, I had tons of friends, and I was okay. Like, I wasn't like, they weren't trying to create a scholar. And we put so much pressure on academic achievement, in my opinion, way too young. And so what happens is, and I've seen this a lot, you'll have kids that did do really well, like they're the opposite of me. Then they become older, and I can tell you right now, they struggle to self-motivate. They struggle to clean their houses. They struggle to have any career that's self-fulfilling because they're not getting that external reward and praise.
Yeah.
And I cannot stress how important it is for us to teach our children to be self-initiating. It's just so important.
Well, not only that, it's introducing them to the fact that it's important to notice your internal experience.
Yes.
Like we're not going to get taught that anywhere in school, that you should know. Like, if anything, we get the opposite. We get taught to repress our internal experience. You know, you have to wait to go to the bathroom or raise your hand. Like, no, you can't go.
Yeah.
Even worse, you can't go outside and run and scream. You can't, right? It's the opposite. So bringing in this messaging of your internal experience is important, and it needs to be listened to by you. And I want to know about it. Right? That is loving and caring and attuned, and it's educational for them, and it builds all these beautiful ways that they become self-motivated. Yeah.
Great question here. So do you consider adults who consider themselves empaths or HSPs, that stands for highly sensitive persons, were dysregulated children who hyper-attune to their environment? Yes.
That's it in a nutshell. That's basically it. You know, we're all empathic.
Yeah.
We're all born with that high sensitivity and empathy. And what happens when you mix that up with dysregulation is you get that. It's where that empathy becomes a problem. This is totally what happened to me. Like,
many healers.
And many healers, they learn to hyper attune to every nuance of their environment as a survival mechanism. This is how I stay safe, is I know what my dad's physiology is doing, my brother, my sister, my stepmom. I am reading all of them constantly so that I know how to make myself such that I can be safe. You know, I know how to model and shape myself so that I can fit in with all their systems. And that takes this hyper attunement. And that is exhausting and destructive for the self. And it leads to someone labeling themselves an HSP or an empath, when really we're all that. It's just, that has been mixed with dysregulation, it's become a problem.
Neurodivergence, another term.
Neurodivergent is another term for that.
Yeah.
So when you get the regulation on board, that liability becomes a superpower. Because what happens is you learn how to turn it on and off to a degree. You become, the dysregulation comes out of the picture. So you have the empathy, but without the hypervigilance. You become much more able to like just sort of not pay attention if you want to, or you can turn that laser-like empathy and attunement into your client to really help them navigate stuff that they themselves might not even be noticing. So yeah, it's something that can be a real detriment, but also can be a superpower.
And there's often when we say these things like HSP, empaths, neurodivergence, these are terms that get thrown around. And having worked in groups where people are labeling themselves as that, I mean, it's going to sound a bit blunt, but most of what I'm seeing is just high, crafty dysregulation. And what happens is people attach to that label, and then they feel that they're special. And sure, we all are special, we're all unique, but when we are married to that term, it keeps us in my opinion, in a bit of a victim identification mode. I can never get out of this because I'm this. And the thing is that we need to understand that if we were all regulated, if we really were in that utopic world, so I get this question asked, Irene, what would it look like if the world was just all regulated and we actually raised babies properly? I've often said, well, it would kind of look boring in some ways, because we'd just be on, we wouldn't be on the plains like hunter-gatherers or nomads, because I think the structures and the technology is here to stay, which has its perks, obviously, because we're doing this. But we would just be a little more chill.
Just be more chill world.
We'd be cool with just making food and playing and exercising and maybe gardening a little bit, maybe hunting a little bit, sleeping, making creations, being artistic with each other. Kind of what we could say tribal society was in those situations. And then, yes, there is going to be diversity in people's personalities in, that person is just way better at comedy and that person is way better at creating with their hands. But it comes out more naturally when our system has base level regulation. And so often people will say things like, oh, well, there's something wrong with the brain, or I have ADD or ADHD, or my kid has this, or my kid has anxiety. And it always comes back to when you can get that baseline regulation back in yourself and work to help your children find that as well. A lot of these diagnoses kind of just fall away. And sometimes people don't want to hear that.
It's true. You can get, it's a very common thing to get attached to a diagnosis because it is a form of safety, right? It's a way of understanding yourself, which, if someone's living in a lot of chaos and dysregulation, a label can feel super comforting. It's like, oh, thank God, it makes sense now. I have this, right? So totally get it. But, and what we've seen over and over is almost every single label you give to a mental, emotional, behavioral problem, it's just another form of dysregulation.
It's rooted in trauma.
It's rooted in trauma and the nervous system. And when you work at that root level, all those various representations just, they just kind of melt away. Like, I guess I would have been considered hypervigilant, social anxiety. I had autoimmune issues, chronic gut problems,
complex
PTSD. All those labels could have applied to me. It's not really an issue anymore, any of that stuff. So it all comes back to these foundational principles, which we're teaching about in SBSM.
It looks like we've covered a lot of the questions. I'm just seeing here. Yeah, we did that one. What's something that we haven't touched on? There's a question here about divorce.
Well, we haven't touched on family systems as, if you're an adult child and if you want to heal, how sometimes you may need to separate from your family system for a while.
That's a good one. Let's talk about that.
Okay.
So I'll talk about what I see, and then you have
Yeah.
more experience with that. But so this is going to be for the adults, but it's going to connect with your connection and attachment to your family. I have seen in my history friends, colleagues who are doing this work, but they can't say no to their families. And here's an example. In our current world, a lot of people who work a 9-to-5 job, 40 hours a week, sadly only get maybe 2 weeks of holiday a year that's paid.
Which is a crime.
Mothers don't get nearly what they need in terms of maternity leave, and then fathers paternity, but that's another situation. But let's just say you are someone who works a 9-to-5 job. You have a very set period of time for time off. You need your holidays. And every single moment you have on holiday is spent flying to appease and take care of your dysfunctional family. Yeah. Don't do that anymore. Yeah. I'm not saying disconnect. Call them. Have a Skype session with them. Have a Zoom session. Send them something in the mail. Because what I see is then if we're not recovered and we're still in, like, say, burnout, we're struggling with our energy and we're flying across country, or we're sleeping in our old house and all these things are coming up and we're doing, we are not taking care of ourselves. And I just, it breaks my heart to see people that I know who spend every single moment that they have for themselves, caring for those who are adults, who really should just be caring for themselves in ways that you can't. So the final thing I'll say, and then we'll hear from you, Seth. I remember a student of ours, it was just a comment in passing, commented on a video I did quite a while ago that was titled, "Why Everyone Has the Capacity to Heal, but Not Everyone Will." So why everybody has the capacity to heal, which is true, but not everyone will. And this person said, "I understand now what you mean, Irene. I am still connected with my mother who abused me and was my abuser, and I cannot break the bond, and I continually take care of herself, take care of her and go into her toxic soup, and I see myself being pulled back into dysregulation, but I can't break the bond." And at least she was aware, names it. It's like, okay, if you know this life, that's your history, your fate, and you're accepting it. There's something about acceptance, great. But for those that are wondering, why can't I get over this? It's like, how often are you binding with your family system in ways that are unhealthy?
Yeah. So, one of the things that I've seen in myself, I've seen in my clients, is that there can often be a period of time where we do have to separate to some degree from our family system. And the reason for this is because when trauma happens in a family system, everyone is kind of invested in that in a way, which may sound weird, but it's a structure. It's a stable structure or a dysfunctional structure, but it's known. It's what's known. This is what we're familiar with. And the more oftentimes we've been traumatized, very often the more we're attached to what's familiar. Because even if it's not functional, it's safe because we know it, right? This is another thing that as we start getting into this work, true safety can feel dangerous, right? Putting yourself into a situation where you have more safety can feel really dangerous. Kind of like, I can't separate from that system. Also, as we start to do this work and get a little bit better, our family system can very often come in and try to sabotage that because they will instinctively sense, oh my gosh, someone is changing the structure. It's like they're changing the atomic structure of an element and everything's like, no, we gotta stabilize. Don't change it, We don't know what we'll change into, right? It's terrifying. And a lot of that can feel, it's all, unconscious and instinctual, but the more you notice these dynamics and become aware of them, the more it can be like apparent that that's what's going on. They may not even realize. So there can be periods of time where it's important to have boundaries. Now, there's a spectrum because there's family systems that are truly awful. And there's parents who are horrifically abusive in ways that I don't even want to go
Mhm.
into. And in those cases, very often it's like, see ya. Like
Yeah.
you don't need to be connected to that person ever again for the rest of your life. It's there, nothing good is on offer there.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's one end of the spectrum. Or it may be just a dysfunctional system where everyone still loves each other, but there's these patterns that are just not great, and you realize you need some space. And it's just a boundary. You say, hey, you guys, I love you. I'm working on something right now, and I need some time away from you. Essentially, I need some time,
or I just need some time
by myself.
you don't
You don't
have
have
to
to.
stay
Yeah,
away.
you have to stay away from you. You could just be like, I need time by myself. I need time to just work through some stuff, right? And then if you get a bunch of pushback, like no, or like they get all sad or hurt, that's a good indication that you really do need that, and you may need a stronger boundary, right? Because any family system that really is loving each other, even if there's dysfunction, they're going to be like, okay, sure, yeah, you take the space that you need. I mean, if my son ever said to me, hey, Dad, I love you, I'm working through some stuff, I need to just sort of be out of contact for a little while, great, go for it. I'm here when you come back. It's kind of like that little person who needs to go away when they're upset. Like, I'm great, you do your thing, I'm right here for you, right? So
there's a question here. How do you renegotiate with your adult child's trauma that you were frozen when it happened and your kid
still blames you? Yeah. How do you repair wounds with an adult child that you maybe were responsible for? That's a tricky one. It may not be your place. It may be that, for one, you have to let them come to you. You can let them know that you're interested, make yourself available, say, hey, I recognize some shitty stuff happened, and I understand you're suffering, and just want you to know that I'm available to talk and repair. Again, for you to be able to do that genuinely, you're going to have to do your own work first. You're going to have to be able to enter into that process, right?
I mean, my first thing would be do your own work.
Yeah.
Do your own work and just do it for you.
Yeah.
Not necessarily to try to fix that, and then see what might happen. Because as Seth said earlier, sometimes we start to do this work and weird stuff starts to happen in our family system that we won't even consider happening. So that would be my suggestion. And having kind of a talk with the ether of accepting, I screwed up. And this is something that Steve Terrell, I did an interview with one of our mentors who specializes in working with childhood trauma, specifically adoption trauma. And on the interview I did with him, and we can pop it up here, interview with Steve Terrell, he really is very clear at saying to parents who did do wrong things, you screwed up.
Yeah.
I'm not going to sugarcoat it. You did something wrong. Comes back to that healthy shame. And I think in our society of I have to be nice, I don't want to rock the boat, it's hard for us to say these things because we don't have a map for how to have positive, open conflict and debate. So it's like, I'm just going to pretend that, I know I did something. I'm just going to ignore it. I'm going to ignore it. Not going to touch it. Yeah. It's like ignoring our own pains and disgust with things. It's like, how can you go, I'm owning up to it. And maybe there's grief, there's sadness, there's anger, and you process it on your own accord. The other thing I wanted to mention before I forget, if you are an adult, which you probably are if you're watching this, and your family system abused you, wronged you, and they screwed up, it isn't always the best idea to confront them with how much they screwed you up. Unless they are open and wanting to heal this. And I've seen a lot of folks, students, who make the mistake of confronting their perpetrators. And if the perpetrators, the abusers, the toxic family have no clue about what their nervous system is, best to just leave that alone.
That's where those boundaries come in, where you just, maybe you don't spend time around them for a while until you develop the capacity that you can be in the room without having to, confront all the stuff because you've resolved it internally.
Yeah.
And so it may still be annoying. Like a good example for me is like now, like I said, my dad's really changed. He's softened a lot. He's more emotionally available, much easier to be around. Because of his lifestyle and where he lives, I still like can't really stand being there for more than a few days. But like when I'm there, I'm fine. I'm not like, I'm genuinely okay. And even though he's still incredibly anxious, it doesn't affect me, right? It's other than like sort of a general kind of strain of a frequency that I'm noticing, right?
And you understand now why he is the way he is.
Yes,
and this is a big part. When we really think about what maybe our parents went through, what our teachers might have went through, and it's like, oh my gosh, no wonder why you're screaming at me. It's because you were beaten to a pulp by your parent and you think screaming is a bit better, which it is in some ways, but it still has an impact. What would you say to that question that I highlighted?
Yeah, that's a great one. So from Caneller, what would you say to parents who think teenagers are always difficult by nature? Nope. I think teenagers will always have a period where they need to individuate themselves. That doesn't have to be a horrible process. Now, in more healthy cultures, there are actual traditions to facilitate that, which are rites and rituals, right? We have rites and rituals in indigenous cultures for teenagers to help facilitate and provide a container for the process of individuation. Which is, I think, incredibly important and missing in our culture. That would go a long way toward helping that process. And also, the more trauma and dysregulation that's in the family system, the more violent that process of individuation is going to be. And that's what's considered the norm. It's absolutely not in the nature. It's just because our whole society is essentially running on survival mode. And the teenager's process of individuation is a reflection of that. It's a reflection of the amount of trauma and dysregulation in the system.
So I'm going to pop a wrench into the spokes of this one, because in working with people when I was in private practice who had siblings, the people who showed up in my office were not the difficult teenagers. The people that showed up in my office were the good kids. So for those of you that have perfect teenagers and perfect kids, watch out. Because they are in some ways probably most certainly and that there was dysregulation growing up and that kind of stuff. They are repressing their anger and fight responses by being the good kid, by holding the space. But what occurs is when there isn't a little bit of this outburst, when we get our hormones and we are just more adult by nature, if that doesn't come out, it is in there waiting and brewing. And then this is what happens when kids go to college and they get into big trouble with drinking and driving drunk and drugs. Not to say that experimentation does not, it happens, but it goes extreme. Because that kid has been so repressed and so good. And so when I think about this one client, I'm thinking about who had so much pain after a car accident. As I started to work with her, what was clear, she was the kid that paid the bills, that cooked the food, that kept the peace. And her brother was the mischievous one that was out getting into trouble, partying. And she's like, he's fine. Right? So there are things that teenagers will do, and I'm not saying that they should be mischievous and shoplift and all these things, but if a kid does some of these things, it's very likely that they're doing it to express rage and aggression and mischievousness and doing something wrong, because they're always good at home, and there needs to be this balance. I feel for teenagers. I was one, you were one. It's not easy, even in a good situation.
And kids right now have it really rough. Like it's not just the burden of centuries, millennia of intergenerational trauma passed down from parent to child that we're living with. It's also the environmental toxicity. It's this crazy world of social media that
screens.
No one is really developmentally able to meet. I mean, as far as I can tell, even adults, we're not ready as a culture for these instant reward machines and the screens and to take us away from nature. I mean, all of that on top, which acts as a management for the dysregulation and the trauma. And then you have, the environmental factors, pesticides, medical procedures. Like there's so many things that kids are dealing with now. So it makes this work all the more important. If you as an adult and a parent can have this lens and this regulation and capacity, even a little bit, even if just to start, it's going to give them a leg up in the world. And the younger they are, the better in terms of like when you're starting, the more powerful impact it can have. But again, it's never too late. It's never too late, even if your kids are grown, to have a positive impact on the whole system by doing your work. Yeah.
There's a question I've highlighted there, which is a big one. It's sort of what we've been talking about, but it might be a good way to start to wrap up.
Well, yeah, we had talked about that it's what can we do for children while working on our own regulation to help them with daily tantrums, aggressive behavior, abandonment sensitivity when having to go somewhere like school. So again, a lot of it is about what activities are you participating in with them? Like the mom who takes your kid to the soccer field after school. That's exactly it.
Yeah.
You need to engage. It's not just enough all the time, and it depends on their age, but we want to engage with them in these things, not just necessarily send them off to various activities, right? We want to be with them in getting our sympathetic system going, in being active, right?
And that's, I'm kind of seeing actually a rubric for how Western society is with their kids. This is how it is. Once your kid is old enough to go to school, they then are slotted with all these activities after school on the weekends. For the most part, the parent drives them, drops them off, and then picks them up, right? Now, there's nothing wrong with learning a structured sport and learning from a coach or being on a team. Nothing wrong with that.
That'd be great.
But what often occurs is the time of connection with parent and child is basically in the morning, getting ready to go to school, and then at night, dinner time, homework time, bath time. And I can tell you, in being in these households, it is so stressful because there is this chore of getting through the daily duties. And that's the only connection that the kids have with their parents is we got to do this, we got to do this, we got to get our teeth brushed, beds made, out the, whatever it is. And it's stressful. And then we wonder why kids don't want to go to bed. They don't want to go to bed. I don't want to go to bed. They probably just want to be with you. And so this is the other thing, is the way we've structured our kids' lives has really destroyed time, real time with their family system.
This also circles back to what I said earlier about, to be healthy with your kids, you may have to disrupt the system. Like it may mean you don't go along with the system because, again, the system is survival driven. You can't just participate with the status quo and expect things to be okay. So you may have to be a bit of a disruptor. Like, my kid's not coming to school today. They're not, you can tell them they're sick. They're not sick. I just want to spend time with them.
We're going to go on
an adventure.
We're going to go hiking. We're going to go do this.
Exactly. Like, you may have to break out of the structure of it.
Agreed. There's a great interview I just watched, and I'll remember it, but it was with a gentleman in the States who's running an alternative school in Wichita, Kansas, I think it was. And he was interviewed by Jordan B. Peterson, and I'll be sure to put it up under the show more. I listened to that interview and I just was like, wow, this is an amazing way to envision schooling children, and they're doing it. And they still go to school. There still is structure, but it's student led. And the adults are there, and it isn't a free for all. They still have to do classes and they still have to do testing, but it honors their natural need to guide. And it puts them in the leadership, not the adults. So it develops their capacity to self-lead, to think creatively, and to problem solve with their peers. And it was super cool.
And to engage with stuff they're interested in.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Like they had books, and it's like they get to choose what they read. And then, of course, there was this one father's like, but what about all the great classics of Moby Dick and this? And it's like, well, maybe they'll read that at some point, but why do they have to?
Yeah.
Like, why do we have to learn Shakespeare? Why do we have to memorize Ulysses? I had to do that. It's like, that offers me nothing. So anyway, that's a whole other topic. Interesting maybe this is a great last question.
Okay,
here.
sure. Yeah. What do you think about skepticism in SBSM participants? Although I believe nervous system dysregulation plays a part in many physical, mental, emotional diagnoses, I'm not sure it's 100%. We're not saying it's 100%. We're saying it's at the root. Very important distinction. There's lots of factors. Like we said, there can be environmental factors, toxins in the environment, lack of enough light.
Sunlight.
You're not in your circadian rhythm. You're not outdoors enough. Too much time with the screen.
Diet.
Not enough exercise. Diet. All of that is a factor. It's just that without addressing the nervous system piece, none of the other interventions are going to be fully effective. Because it is the foundational piece, like learning the language of the nervous system so that you know how to feel your system saying, I need to go outside. I don't want that food. I don't want this thing. I need this thing, right? Learning to tap into the wisdom, the felt sense, intuition of the body is a big part of this, which then informs all the other type of health decisions. So you're right. It's not 100%. It's just the foundation that makes everything else more effective.
And we really didn't talk about the science of the nervous system, but as a general teaching piece, it governs all our systems. So if you look at an actual image of the peripheral nervous system, which are all the nerves that come out of the brain and spinal cord, it touches everything from our organs to our skin, to our bladder, our hormonal glands, our ability to move, our ability to interact and see the world. All of that is governed by the autonomic nervous system. And so I understand the skepticism because we have been taught, almost conditioned, that there's cause and effect. There's a problem and it must be this one thing. And sometimes that's true. The medical model has taught us that. You have an infection, it's often like, take antibiotics. Of course, we know that that's not always true, but you have a broken bone, you got to fix the bone. These sorts of things. But this is like a whole other paradigm. It's more akin to an ecosystem outside. It's more like regenerative farming. It's like an ecosystem where you have all the animals and the dirt and the worms and the stream and the sun and the microbes working together. But if you put a poison into that system, a man-made, sadly, poison into that system, everything is going to be off. So if we think about the human system in dysregulation, we have in some ways, quote unquote, poisoned our nervous system via this mis-attunement, this lack of connection, and recognizing that humans are animals that need a certain type of care. And so when we bring that regulation, that attachment, that connection, that impulse following of the biology back, it literally does ripple to all the parts of the body and how we interact with the environment. But it does take this little bit of 180-degree flip to go, oh, okay, I get it. The poison is the dysregulation that is culture, essentially, society. But we have this organic system that is akin to a natural ecosystem. We just have created this a domestication, industrialization that is throwing us off course. My belief is that we can get back on course with industry, with tech, and still have our ecosystems functioning properly. We've seen that in our students. We've seen when they get into this curriculum, and specifically this curriculum that is a blend of many different modalities, they see this ripple effect come throughout their system. And it can be shocking, actually. Almost like, this seems too good to be true, that these little tiny things are creating this big shift. But think about the ecosystem. If you stop putting the toxins into that stream, things are going to get better. It heals naturally.
There's an organic trend towards healing in nature, which includes us. Right? And very often that means, maybe you're not taking in the poison anymore. You're emptying out the poison that was already being held in the system, then you're learning how to avoid more poison because, hey, you're more aware and you're in tune, right? So it's this evolving kaleidoscope kind of thing. You know, one of the things that we often get asked in this work at the beginning from students is, will this exercise help with this problem? That's not how this work works most of the time. It's a kaleidoscopic approach where it's about learning a whole different way of being that is fundamentally based in attuning to yourself, which is very often what we never got in the first place.
Exactly.
Right? So it's about learning to be your own practitioner, learning to be your own guide, and really for the wisdom of your nervous system to be your guide in all these things.
It will guide us if we know how to listen to it, but we've been so conditioned not to listen to it that we're not getting its signals. The thing, and that maybe we'll end with, is when we start to give it what it needs, it actually perks up pretty damn fast.
Pretty quick.
And then it's watching our habits that pull us away from that simplicity. So a big part of the course is teaching yourself how to learn again, and how to listen again, and how to engage with yourself in a way that's very different than how we've been talking about how we were taught as kids to learn. So I think we'll end it there. We've covered a lot. Like I said, if you don't know the details of Smartbody SmartMind, the site has everything on it in terms of what you get, how it works, how the support works, how the lessons work. My talk yesterday on the 12th of September does a more significant rundown of the origin story. So be sure to check that out if you're new here. We'll do some more talks this week. I'm going to talk to some alumni on Friday on Zoom, but everybody's invited. I'm also going to talk to some of our students who are learning to be practitioners through my crazy ways on Monday. And then we'll do another final call on Tuesday. If you are a 21-day nervous system tune-up member, we're going to do a special Zoom call tomorrow just for you guys to answer your questions. And if you have any questions logistically, you're not sure how something works, just email us. So support@irenelyon.com. We read every email. Everything will get answered. It's better than popping us a DM on Instagram or on Facebook. So email us, support@irenelyon.com. And like I said, registration is open until Tuesday. And then we'll reopen again next year. So if you can, now is the time to get in, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thanks for being here, everyone.
Thanks, Seth.
Yeah, good talking to you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for the links, Bonnie. Also.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.